Talking about ADHD often involves a balancing act between the positive things regarding hyperfocus, being energetic, being able to work on multiple different tasks, having strengths in areas that might not seem to have a lot to do together, as well as the not so positive aspects of difficulty paying attention, going through mood swings, sometimes having attraction to risky behaviors that may involve substance use, things of this nature. I had the really good fortune of being able to speak to a person that is a good friend of mine. Her name is Lian. She's amazing, does all sorts of wonderful things in the cloud native community. And we had a really good conversation about her experience with ADHD, what it means to her, how she's been able to define herself as a person outside of ADHD, all the wonderful things that she's good at, ranging from developer relations, community organization, event organization, and also things that are more on the theatrical side, doing stand-up comedy, things like that. So I'm definitely very sure that you're going to like this episode. Let's jump into it and check it out. So it's been a while since I've done an ADHD episode, and I had the lovely excuse to do so because of talking to Lian. It's like, hey, I also have ADHD. I was like, okay, cool. Let's start it up. And you responded to our speaker form with a few different things. But first of all, I want to get a little bit more background about you, but specifically related to you and your ADHD experience. When did it start? How did it start? Tell us all about it.
When did it start? Yes, probably from the day I was born. Now, in retrospect, that's what I'm thinking. I never really thought about it until it became kind of like ubiquitous. I don't know if you noticed, but a couple of years ago, it seemed like everyone, especially everyone in DevRel, seemed to have ADHD. But it really became real for me when I got a diagnosis, and this happened a couple of years back. I was treated for burnout, and I did a drug rehab in that time. And one of the things that they would be doing ADHD and PTSD screenings, just because a lot of people who have ADHD or PTSD would use drugs to self-medicate. And so we did the screening, and then my doctor was saying that, yes, it looks like I'm on that spectrum, but to hold off on medication just to see, like, how do I react to stopping with smoking weed. That was my main thing. And see if the symptoms would get worse. They didn't really get worse, so we concluded that I probably don't need medication. And I'm pretty happy about that because it's like easier to deal with, for me at least, if I know this is the ADHD and this is maybe what drugs do to change my behavior and how my brain works, just to get a little bit of clarity on, exactly how things are. So that was like 2 or 3 years ago. And since then, I have obviously educated myself a bit more on the ADHD. But just in general, just knowing there's this thing that influences my brain, there's nothing I can do about it, it's just how my brain works, is a very freeing experience.
I hear you on that, in the freeing experience aspect, in the sense that there's nothing you can do, but what you can do is, self-acceptance and not be hard on yourself for being who you are. I think it's a recurring theme that I definitely touch on a lot in these conversations, is that, the more you get to know yourself, the easier it is, where the more opportunities you have perhaps to show self-kindness, where at least in my particular case in the past was just, you're a fuck up, why are you doing this wrong, you can't do anything right. That's unfortunately been a recurring theme for too long. And it takes time to change those things and to rewire things. If you don't mind, I'd just like to know a little bit more, because also as a person who's struggled with substance abuse at different points, what was sort of a triggering thing where you're like, you know what, just because, like, in my experience, having had multiple flare-ups of like, oof, maybe this is getting out of hand, I would like to do something about this, but I don't really know what to do. It's sort of unpacking that. Is it the substance that's the problem, or the things that are leading me to that substance? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it just all ties together in like behavior and habits. So I was using drugs to regulate my emotions and stress level. And because I'm very impulsive, which is due to my ADHD, it is very difficult for me to pick up like some long-term good habits. I would rather just do the impulsive thing and then just like, smoke a joint to calm down, for example. So I think this all ties together. And then using drugs to self-medicate then probably exacerbates the poor impulse control, because I don't learn to actually control my impulses, but rather take on this habit. So that kind of like all spirals into very unhealthy habits. And there's nothing like, it's not that it's one fault or like one thing is more at fault than the other thing. For me, the tipping point was really, I was burned out. I was homesick for like 1 or 2 months before I started the rehab. So I was talking to my GP, and she recommended for me to do the rehab because that would be like an easier way for me to get to therapy. Because like it's everywhere in the world. It's really difficult to get therapists right now. There's like a long waiting line for almost everyone. So that was like a way that I could do, and this was also during Corona, so there was no going anywhere anyway. So I could have weekly therapy sessions online. And, it wasn't like no one forced me to do the rehab. It was more about, let's just leave everything behind you and just really clear out everything out of your system. Don't think about, things that stress you out. Don't use any substances. And just see where that takes you. Like, where are you if you leave all of these things behind?
Hear you on that. Regarding going back to what you said in the beginning about, the impulse control factor, is that, is it, the lack of, planning something out or seeing like, okay, it's not just what you're doing right now. This has consequences that will carry on through the rest of your day and possibly to the next day, and also establishing thought patterns around, it's almost like, oh, I want to lose weight, so instead of eating healthier, I just won't eat, almost like this Gary, the immediate sort of just rushing into that. And it's hard. And a lot of times with the impulse stuff in general is, in my experience, particularly with like, having spikes of substance use problems more and more in the past with both marijuana and alcohol, is that it's like you're doing the thing that is a bad idea, but before you even have a chance to stop it. And so it's very hard to explain sometimes, because it's like, I'm not trying to sound like a crazy person, but it's almost like this autopilot, like, I'm already rolling this, I'm already drinking something, and that's it. So like, this is already like a done deal. There's not like an internal dialogue or a conversation. Just, this is just happening. I'm doing this. And it's also, and like you said, when you get used to those things, it just becomes the easiest thing to do because of force of habit. And in my case, I don't know how it was in yours, learning that I can function and I can still be a working professional and do all the things that, pretty much do everything that I do, except having decent quality sleep and having mood swings and having lots of other stuff. But when you learn that you can do all that sort of stuff, it's kind of dangerous, because you're like, oh, it's not really a problem. Like, I'm still getting by just fine. I'm hitting all my targets. I'm doing all the things I need to be doing. I'm not getting fired. I'm actually excelling in my career. And some people might find that hard to believe, but it's also kind of, you create a chaotic environment. And I think a lot of people with ADHD often thrive in chaotic environments. So like, to guarantee, anyway, it's just kind of ends up chasing its tail. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Oh man, there's a lot of thoughts there. So my kind of, like, I have the flavor of ADHD where I get extremely productive for a while and then not at all. And I think that, I think this has nothing to do with ADHD. Like, the things that you go the easier path, maybe you take the easier path, the thing that works out for you, even though it's unhealthy. You will indulge in something even though it's probably not a good decision down the line. That's normal, I think. I think with a lot of people who have ADHD, they have, like, similar to me, this complex of, it's like either 100% or nothing. Like, either you do something perfectly, or if you already messed it up a little bit, it's fucked up now, so whatever. Like, you can just, if you trying to lose weight and you have like a calorie goal, and maybe you like had a little bit too much to eat. You're like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter now. I'll just like give me the pizza or whatever. So that's something that like this all or nothing kind of thinking that really makes it hard to build a consistent habit or consistent good habits, because you're always going to fail. You always have days where it's not going to work out, and to not let yourself be beaten down by those days, but rather look at the things that are going well, like the consistency, how you're consistently getting better. That's kind of hard to see for me sometimes, because I either zoom in a lot or zoom out a lot, if that makes sense, right? And then the rest that you said, I already forgot.
It's okay. Probably talking too fast. Yeah, is what I really like what you said about everything right there. Is yeah, once again, the tendency to get hard on yourself and the feeling that it's kind of all or nothing. One thing that
I remember the other thing that I wanted to mention is while I was burned out, I realized, like, I was thinking about why didn't I notice that this is about to happen. And I've been also I had therapy for like 7 years before to deal with depression and anxiety.
yeah.
And while I was researching, I learned about the term high functioning depression, which is, people are getting depressed, but instead of like being very down, they just work really hard. Like they're super productive, and that pushes the depression even further. And I thought like, oh, maybe this is something that sounds very familiar. And that's how kind of like how I got into, oh, this actually sounds a bit like ADHD. And that's how I kind of like got into that. But this is also something that I see a lot with like my friends who have ADD or ADHD, that they tend to get really productive and they're able to push themselves really far, even though their tank is kind of empty already.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. And so I guess it's like you're falling, but since you haven't hit the ground, it's like, well, so far so good. And I think what I was piqued some curiosity for me just from when you talked about from the very beginning is, I don't know, but I previously had this idea of burnout as being like, I can't get out of bed, I'm so just destroyed.
Right.
And there are many phases of burnout. That could be one of them, but it's until I really started talking to people and realizing that it's much more common and it takes many forms. It's different for every person. You can be burned out and still keep going. That's when I realized like, oh, I've probably burned out several times and I just didn't stop. And so there are different reasons for that. I think another thing as well too that, and one of the reasons, one thing that I've noticed being pointed to is why there's an overlap of a lot of people in DevRel that have ADHD is that it involves so many different tasks that for a lot of times, and of course there are people that don't have ADHD that are in DevRel. I mean, it's ridiculous to assume that. So, but what I am saying is that because it involves content creation, generally, public speaking, things that might be more on the creative side, interacting with lots of different stakeholders, so lots of sources of stimuli, so it's not getting just stuck on like one kind of thing, being able to touch different areas. And of course, DevRel is very diverse, and we can have an entirely separate conversation just about all the things that are involved there. But I think that that's something that naturally lends itself, or in my case of being a freelancer, so I'm working on video projects, I'm doing different things around content creation, I'm organizing events or going to events or speaking at events. Those are things that are for me that I learned is like, okay, this makes sense. Like for me, just to be doing one thing repeatedly, it's not going to work very well. What I want to get back to though is the burnout thing. What was that like? What was a day in Lian's burnout like? What were the things that you went through? Because I just think for people to have like more specific things to relate to is helpful to see like, oh, actually that's something I've gone through as well.
Yeah. I don't even know, like I couldn't pinpoint like this is when I started to burn out. Like you'd never know, because it just at the beginning you're just feeling tired, you just feel stressed. That's normal. You have those days once in a while. And so the day that I realized I cannot do this anymore was I was I was working at a consultancy. I had like a lot of clients at the same time. And I got up in the morning and I started crying because there was so much pressure. There was nothing particular, nothing specific that I was unhappy about that day. You know, there was nothing where I was, oh, I don't want to do this. It was just, there was obviously some emotion that needed to come out. And then I started crying, and then I got on with it, got on with my day. And, you know, when you are in that phase where you can still go, but you're already either burned out or really on the path to it, it's like you just feel very empty and hollow. And you like, if you don't take care of your emotions and you don't look within you often, you probably won't notice that, like, just the joy and the passion and who you are just slowly just kind of trickles away. And by the time that I realized, like, I can't do this anymore, I have to stop, I realized, like, all the things that would give me joy, that made me happy, just didn't give me anything anymore. And that was the worst part. And that started after I stopped working, because then I finally had time to even try and do the things that I loved. And that was like a really terrible time for me, because I just kind of completely lost who I am, like my identity. What are the things that make me happy? What are the things that make me me? I just lost everything at that point. And really, I was really trying to do anything, like exercise, you know, get into music. And I could do them. It's not like, you know, like I wasn't too physically tired to do them. It was just, there was no motivation. There was no, like, it almost felt like I wasn't even a human being anymore. Like I was just my body doing things, going through the motions. That was a really, really terrible time. And then after maybe, like, since the day that I requested sick leave, maybe like 3 or 4 months. So then I quit my job, and that's when I started to slowly, like, wake up again, like slowly feel anything again. Like, even, like, you don't even feel sadness that much. You just feel like nothing really. And then slowly I started feeling like, okay, finally I've done this thing, and I really got into it again, like really getting into the groove. I think this is something with a lot of people who have ADHD. They get into these grooves where they can work on something for like 4 hours straight without taking a break. And then I started getting into that again. And that's when but then I'm pretty sure I will never be the same person that I was before I burned out. It just feels completely different. I'm much more aware of my mental health. You know, I'm much, much more protective of my time and energy. I will stop things much sooner, and I also won't let myself be pushed into things that I don't want to do. Because I think the main thing that drove me into the burnout is not working hard. Working hard is something that a lot of people can do, and actually is something that I enjoy doing and gives me energy. But if you work hard, but you're not getting anywhere, you know, you feel like all the work that you're doing is going nowhere. That's what kind of, I think, added the last thing to the burnout that actually made me burn out.
Very fair point. And a few things there, you know, being more protective or defensive of your mental health, understanding that it's something you can be defensive and protective of, you know, understanding what's involved before you say yes to something, what's involved in that commitment, although those things can be difficult. In my experience, a lot of it is, and some of what you said there too, is that, you know, having a tendency of being a people pleaser means that it's very difficult to say no to things. You always, you know, there's need for approval. And a lot of that too is that, and this has come up in a few of these conversations, but that, you know, as people that are, you know, outward facing, we can say generally outgoing, more on the extrovert side, although once again, you find lots of different personality types. People might not assume that in my particular case of low self-worth, low self-esteem, and then that drives a need for approval a lot of times, and that you're not going to feel, it's not going to be good enough if it's just good enough for you. It's got to be good enough for somebody else, and you need that approval. And so it means that you end up putting your needs way, way, you know, into the background and putting everything else first. And so it took a long time to learn that, and I do feel like I'm doing a better job with that, but it definitely took a long time to get there. It's something that I see other folks struggling with. So we've talked a good amount about these elements of burnout and your experience, you know, getting to be with ADHD. But what are some of the positive things that you find with ADHD? It's always, you know, this balance, right? In your case, how
Right.
does it manifest itself in positive ways?
Yeah. I really love getting into these, like work marathons where I get like very creative and um, really energized. I think that's a superpower that I love about the ADHD. And like I pick up things fairly quickly because I get so obsessed with them. I have a lot of hobbies, which is not ideal for my wallet, but it does
What are
give
your
you
hobbies?
like I'm doing right now. I'm rehearsing for two musicals. So there's singing, dancing, and I'm cutting basically all the music backing tracks. I record the voice type that I have to sing, which is tenor. I record that on my keyboard. I cut that over the backing tracks. I put like some karaoke style video lyrics on top and the choreography so that I basically have the musical as a movie so I can rehearse to that. It's a lot of work, but I love it. And it makes me so happy because then I can do it and then I can share it with the other folks from the cast, which also, as you say, like the people pleasing, the doing stuff that benefits someone else is really important to me. I think that's the thing that makes me even happier. Like doing something for myself is fine, but giving something to someone else, especially if that someone is not able to do the same things that I am, that is makes me really happy. I don't know. I don't want to say that ADHD is like a fad or anything, but it is also kind of nice to have something to connect with other people. Like whenever I see like an ADHD meme or something, it's just very comforting to know like, oh, other people have that too, and it's actually fine. You were saying this earlier, like that you were feeling, like I just can't do this. I'm a piece of shit, whatever. I have that too. And then like when I was a kid, my parents would always, like my mother especially, she would always tell me that I'm lazy. And, every time I don't get something done, I procrastinate. I always beat myself up over it, like, oh, I'm lazy. That's probably also why when I'm starting to feel tired, I'm not stopping because I feel like, oh, I just need to like push myself more and then I'll be normal again. It's just a phase. You just push yourself through it and it will be fine. It's just a bit of stress and it will be fine. Because we've been taught somehow to not listen to ourselves, to not trust ourselves, because something's wrong with me, right? That's what I was thinking all my life, that something is wrong with me and I need to, get over it. I just need to get on with my shit. So now I'm just trying to learn to listen to myself because I think I can be very sensitive to some things that maybe other people can't. I don't know if this is ADHD related, but I think I'm pretty good at reading people. Like it's empathy, but also just like I have a gut feeling about people, and it has never let me down. Sometimes I tell myself like, oh, don't be early to judge, but then later it turns out, what, I was right in the first place. And I don't know if this is ADHD related, but I feel like
I think I
this
have
is
heard about
something
that
that's
as
very helpful.
as like a sixth sense or intuition.
Mhm.
But not 100% sure about that. So
You know
I'm
what? I
not a
think
medical
there's
professional, but I think I've heard something about that.
it's difficult to say like this causes that and that causes that. Sometimes it's just like a comorbidity thing. For example, I think that if you're a child with ADHD, it's not unlikely that the way that you're brought up is kind of like harsh. Like maybe if it's really bad, maybe abusive. But if you are a kid who's like has difficulties regulating the emotions and is not able to function in like a regular 8 to 9 kind of way that's kind of expected from you, then you're being treated in a very restrictive kind of way. And that can lead to, for one thing, you have to learn to read people's emotions, your parents' emotions, because you need to know when they're going to go off on you again, right? When you need to duck and, run away or whatever. Yeah, but then also like you learn how to, forget about your needs and put other people's needs before you because you're being taught that this is the right way to behave and you behaving the wrong way.
That's certainly, there's a lot with that regarding behavior. I do resonate also with the intuition thing. I would say that, and I also goes through my head like, don't judge someone, give everybody a chance. And sometimes I would say that maybe sometimes I'm off on that, but in general it comes really quickly. And in general,
You can give people a chance. Like I was saying, don't give people a chance, even if you have a weird feeling about them.
Yeah, people
It's
can
just
people can prove you wrong,
still
but in
listen
general,
to your gut.
it's true. It's true. And there are some times where I don't listen, then it's like, oh, should have listened. So that can happen as well. In your case,
Exactly.
In your case, one topic that you often ask about as well too. In your case, did you go the medication route, and if so, what were the results?
I did not go the medication route because, as I said before, like my doctor was saying, like it's probably not necessary. She did say we can try like Ritalin. Like basically, she said, okay, I need to stop using any kind of drugs, so that includes alcohol, for I don't know, half a year or something before we should go on medication, just because we don't want any cross contamination of different kind of substances. So that was one thing that I was already like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. But then because my symptoms didn't get any worse and I felt like I can probably regulate by healthy habits, I just decided to not do that. And I don't feel the need to do it. I don't think that I think I can still function with the right like lifestyle and everything. So I'm trying, even though my parents are actually both pharmacists, maybe that is the reason why I just want to stay away from medication as far as I can.
It's fine. And the thing is, it really is a personal choice for everybody. And in my case, I did go the medication route at the beginning.
Right.
And no, I'm not.
How was that for you?
That's a good question. Is so like in the beginning, I took Concerta. And by the way, all psychiatrists are drug dealers who push drugs heavily. And I remember I asked my therapist, like, I can't believe they're telling you to take something they've never taken before. And she said, actually, I think what they really do is they take all the drugs so that they form an opinion.
Oh, they just they throw everything at you, and whatever sticks is the right amount and the right drug.
And what I would tell folks out there, if you're going to go the medication route, ask lots of questions. And ask all the questions that you possibly can, or do research on your own, and then ask questions about the research regarding, side effects, like all that kind of stuff. I definitely wish I had asked more questions, or I don't know, because you need to be kind to yourself in that process of you're putting something in your body, you're taking a drug, and it's going to react different in every case. Your body has to get used to it, so it's not going to be the same. The first days will be after the first week. And that was definitely my case. It would have been really helpful to have known that when I started. But with Concerta in the beginning, it was relatively low dose, and then the psychiatrist increased it. Because like I said, this drug dealer been telling me, what happens if you take more? It's like, okay, we're not at a music festival, but fine. So so I increased the dosage.
Only one way to find out.
That's exactly, you want to go there. He increased the dosage, and like, then I really started to feel kind of like, my way of describing it is kind of like fuzzy, like kind of like radio static, or that was just like something that was supposed to help me concentrate actually wasn't helping me concentrate, although at a lower dose it was. So then we switched to a different one that's called Elvance, and that's a more expensive one, but it's supposed to be like a higher level neuropharmaceutical, whatever, medication.
Yeah.
And so then was with that for a while. All the while, I have to say, and because your point about what you were told about, not to consume any, alcohol, marijuana, etc.
Yeah.
Is that I was also told that, and I was also told about caffeine, but I just kept consuming everything. And so I really have to say that, like, because the combination of amphetamine and caffeine is like, bing. And so, sure enough, it's like you're on amphetamine, and if you drink coffee, then it deepens the effects. And so you just get and then you listen to music at the same time, and if, whatever. It's like, I don't want to say euphoria is the term, but you definitely really feel like in the zone. And there are other things as well too around exercise. I remember the first guest that we had on this, Zach Punches, he mentioned about, be careful with taking this kind of stuff in exercise, because like your heart can get like overworked. And I think it's another, like, it wasn't my case, but I think that's something everyone should keep in mind. is that, this stuff seems innocent in a way, but there's some, it's just important to know what you're putting into your body.
Yeah, they're drugs.
They're drugs.
As a doctor that prescribes them to you, but they're still drugs, and you need to be
careful with that. And just because it gives you an effect one day, and so then I was on that, and then I was given a prescription for an impulsive pill, which is called Intuniv. I guess in Spanish we say Intuniv, so I don't know what it would be in English.
Okay.
And the first few days, it felt I was just like exhausted, and that's common. But I wasn't really told that by the psychiatrist, and so I had to find that out the hard. I maybe you can say you might feel a little bit drowsy, but I was really tired. And then my body got used to it after a couple of days. But to be totally honest, I never really noticed that big of a difference in terms of feeling impulsive. Like I said, my particular case is different for everybody. So yeah, after a while, and meanwhile, paying for all this stuff out of pocket, it's expensive. And the option of getting it moved over to the public health care system was eventually, what I pushed for. And I was lucky to have support there. Everybody's experience is different depending on what country you're in and what doctors you have and all that kind of stuff. So then I had another conversation with my psychiatrist, and I was very upfront with him and said, hey, look, I haven't stopped drinking coffee, and I also haven't stopped drinking alcohol, this sort of stuff. And so it's probably not the best circumstances. So anyway. So then he starts talking about alternatives and this and that. And so then he prescribed another one that's sort of lighter in terms of, and I stopped taking the anti-impulse stuff just because it wasn't really doing anything. It was apart from burning a hole in my pocket. It's like €100 a month for each one.
Wow.
It's, you know what I mean? This stuff adds up. And so this is also, so many of these conversations in my case have come from a very privileged position of oh, well, I can afford it. And so, and on top of having therapy sessions and on top of paying, it's all this, psychiatrists love to let you know when invoices are due. And of course, and it's funny, it's dude, all your patients are people with ADHD, and you're asking everybody to remember, tight deadlines about payments. But that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I gotta say also, just throwing in that, mental health has become an industry now. So you need to also be aware of that this is something that makes a lot of money. And, to some extent, I was probably also, to this day, I still sometimes wonder, maybe I don't have ADHD. Maybe I have some of the symptoms of it, but, maybe there is a spectrum and everyone's somewhere on the spectrum, but it's not that bad. So I'm just terrified to be addicted to a drug that, any kind of drug, honestly. I am, and I feel the ones that I am addicted to is already enough. I don't need any more addictions.
Don't need
I don't
another
even
one to
drink
the list.
coffee.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was that was what my main thing is oh, if you can avoid it, just and then. What you were saying, you're getting drowsy and that will make you less impulsive, I guess, when you're so tired you can't even do anything. And that's what I'm saying is if this is to me, I feel I can regulate through habits, but if I take this medication, I don't learn to do it in my brain. I just knock myself out, or I just create another brain chemistry, so I don't do it, but I'm not addressing the actual problem, right? It's just like smoking weed. It's just
I hear it. No, I hear you on that. But I think that true therapy is combining the two. That it's medication can help you get there, but simultaneously you're going through those processes of reflection and digging deep and all those. I completely agree, because just throwing medication at the problem, I think, is very superficial. I think trying to get deeper self-understanding and realizing where your thought patterns come from and accepting yourself for who you are. I think that, like I said, it's different in every case. So as of right now, so as of right now, for the last, I would say since August, I haven't renewed any prescriptions. I would say, since August, September. And I would say, there are advantages and disadvantages, but for right now, it's fine. And it's also because of having these conversations with different people with ADHD that everyone has a different experience. Some people have stayed on medication since they were 20, and that's their deal, and that works fine, and that's what they're doing. Other people try different medications. Other people are on, periods where they're off. It's really different for everybody. So the main thing is just ask lots of questions and try to be informed. I guess thinking about other things in your case in terms of you were very candid with me about this, but in terms of talking about this with other people, let's say in the workplace, how do you address that?
That's a very good question. I tend to not bring it up that much. I don't want the stigma. I don't want to be identified through my ADHD. There are some people who do that, and I really like they speak, like you, for example. You're doing the podcast. My former colleague Rich, he is also very outspoken about it, and I really, really respect that. I think to me is like I just feel very private about it. So like when Rich and I were working together, Rich was always very vocal about, he has ADHD, which means that like he was managing expectations, which I think was a really good idea. Saying that, I can be very productive for like this amount of time, but then sometimes I'm not. And one of the things that he was always very adamant is that you can't force him to do anything because he'll shut down. It's the same for me. If you try to force me to do something that I don't want to do, that I think is not the right thing to do, it will just torture me, right? Like I will feel very bad. And this is exactly the thing that drives me into burnout. I will still try to do it, but it's like, I almost can't bring my brain to like work on it.
Or your
It's
body.
just so hard.
Or your body.
Yes.
Like, and what I try to explain this to
exactly.
people is like, trust me, I want to do the thing that you're asking me to do, but I can't. And it could be the simplest thing in the world. Like, you ask me to do something really complex, I'll probably think about it for a long time. Like, oh, maybe see how I can figure out how to do it. Mundane, routine stuff. Like in the past, billing as a freelancer, you have to be in charge of sending invoices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I would drag those things out for months and not get paid for work that I had done just because I was like, I'm not going to do it. I just reject that. I can't do it. And it's very hard to explain to people because it's like, believe me, I wish I could do this. I watch other people do it in 10 seconds, but I can't for the life of me bring myself to do certain things. And it's really hard.
Yeah. And then, so, like I never mentioned to our manager that I had ADHD because I didn't think it was relevant, but then I saw that, I wasn't getting the same treatment, and I think that made me even more not wanting to tell that, because I feel like I shouldn't need to tell you that I have a medical condition for you to treat me in like a respectful way, to not force me to do things that I don't want to do, and that's probably where I'm coming from, is like, I don't want to, like, I'm aware of the things that I can and cannot do, but I don't want to make it a thing unless it's absolutely necessary. I will talk to my colleagues about it, but I don't want to like report it to my manager if it doesn't, like, not to receive something, or like not saying that this is what people do who mention that to their managers. I think it's like, if maybe that would be better. But yeah, I don't know. I'm probably still scared that I don't have it. Like I still kind of feel like a bit of an imposter because it doesn't affect me as much as it does other people, right? I almost feel like I don't have the right to talk about it because I live a very privileged life, and like it doesn't affect me in as much that I can't work or something. Obviously, I know this is just all like blah, 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 blah. But still, it's just the feeling that I have.
Yeah, I hear you on that. At the same time, I understand what you mean. Is that, and this has been a recurring topic as well in these conversations, is that we're not asking for like red carpet treatment, or that like, oh, I'm allowed to just like not do work assignments because I have ADHD. It's like, no.
Yeah.
I need to be held accountable for everything just as everybody else is. What I would like to explain is that some of the things that I might do, that's the thing, is that in some cases, someone might ask me to do something. I'll do a bunch of additional stuff, not focus on the thing that I was originally asked to do, and be like, hey, I just handed you all this amazing work, but they're like, yeah, but I asked you to do this. I'm like, oh shit. So that's why it's like, okay, in order to prevent that, let's make sure that I have really specific focus, targeted deadlines, concrete deliverables. And then if I decide that I want to go off and start doing a bunch of other things, then fine. But first and foremost, give me this, and then we can worry about that.
Yeah.
It's just for me, it's, in terms of understanding when I say, managing expectations is one thing, but it's like, I want them to expect high quality work. It's just that my way of doing it might be a little bit different from other people they're working with. But I don't want it to be that like if someone else does a 10 and I do a 7, that it counts as a 10. No, a 10 is a 10 and that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
I also understand though that it really, and I also, which is why I understand the hesitance. And this is interesting too, is that with customers in Spain, Spanish companies, I probably wouldn't bring it up because here it's in adult ADHD is still a very new thing in Spain. It's a very new thing in many places, but it's a very new thing in Spain to the point that you mentioned. It sounds like, oh, Bart just got out of a mental hospital. In the English speaking world, it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, my cousin and this other person and a bunch of other people have ADHD. It's no big deal. So that's interesting how that conditions it. But what I really want to get to is whether it's in English or Spanish or German or any other language is that the reaction depends on the person that you have in front of you. And if the person that you have in front of you is someone who's been trained on this sort of stuff or is aware of it, they'll receive it in one way. If it's the first time they're hearing about an adult with ADHD, it's like, oh, so you're telling me that you're crazy? And how did you get hired here in the first place? So it's really up to everybody about how they want to approach it. And I think a lot of it is about the context that you provide and being specific about how it manifests itself. But I do understand that it's really up to everybody in terms of how they're.
Yeah. You know, like I know some people, and it just freaking drives me up the wall, who will use the ADHD to excuse everything, right? Like, oh, I didn't work on this at all, and I didn't tell you about this because I have ADHD. Like, man, that's just rude. Like, okay, you have ADHD, that's why you did it, but that's not an excuse for, like not letting your teammates know, right? Like, because I believe we all have something. There's no person on this planet that has like a completely 100% neurotypical brain. I don't believe that. Obviously, I'm not a scientist. I don't know this, but this is what my belief is. And I think it's okay. It's necessary that we all get to know each other as human beings. Like, everyone has their thing. Like, I have this unique combination of, anxiety, depression, substance abuse problems, and ADHD that lead, possibly behavioral OCD as well, that lead me to behaving in a particular way. And someone else has some other combination of things and thus behaves maybe exactly the same or maybe different, and it doesn't even matter to me why you behave this way. Like, what's the reason? It's more about, okay, so you know this, I know this. What are our expectations of each other? And how can we do our best to accommodate those expectations when we work together or when we are, like friends? I think that's more important than labeling you have ADHD. For me, it's important to understand why I'm doing things, obviously, but I don't need to know this about you unless you want to talk about it. So I'm trying to, actually here in the Netherlands, people are also very open about it. Like, some people that I barely know have been like, oh, I have ADHD. That's why I just run around the whole time. I'm like, you didn't have to tell me that. It's totally fine. Like, I'm not judging you, but I get why people feel the need to excuse a behavior that is generally frowned upon by explaining that it's a medical condition. And I'm sad that people feel the need that they have to do that, because I don't think we should have to disclose our conditions to the world just to be accepted.
No, I think it's fair. With that in mind, is that it's like it's what, as you said previously, if it's being if it's just constantly being used all the time for being unprofessional, no. If it's a way of saying like, I have a way of doing things that might be different from others, I think it's totally okay. The other thing that I really like what you mentioned too is that, because a friend of mine, his girlfriend has OCD, and then when I got diagnosed with ADHD, he and I worked together on a lot of projects. So like, he started looking at this and he was like, oh, there are actually some overlaps with OCD. There are overlaps with OCD. There are overlaps with bipolar. We actually had, Dave Sudi on here, who's I was ADHD and bipolar. Yeah. And Amanda Brock, who was on the autism spectrum and also has ADHD, and the overlaps that you find there. So you find, also because these things are still recent. They haven't been studied for 500 years. Like, it's quite recent. So to really pin it down and say it's this or it's that can be tricky. And going back to anxiety and depression, you see that a lot. And that's no secret with, in ADHD, because of anxiety and substance use can often go hand in hand. Things, in terms of depression, and being impulsive. That's why, unfortunately, there's a strong, suicide statistics that are associated with people that have ADHD as well. And because of going through emotional peaks and, highs and lows and things of that nature. And once again, substance use, compounds those things and
Right.
and brings everything to a more significant degree. So I think it's really just about what it means to you, how it influences your life, how it really, and because where it gets tricky is breaking into identity. And so it's like, if your entire identity is just based on this, then I would say you should probably reevaluate your identity. Like this is because then life becomes pretty boring. If like that's all you are is just this. So I think that can get a little bit tricky for some people that are recently diagnosed. I went through that as well, because you start unpacking like this sort of like grief period of like, oh, so who am I, or who was I, and why did I do all these things? Like, you're you, and it's totally fine.
Right. It's when you first go to therapy and start blaming everything on your parents, because you finally understand, oh, this is where it's coming from. And yes, it is where it's coming from, but now you're a grown up and you have to like take responsibility for your life now. Like, there's nothing you can change about the past, so you need to get on with it. And there's one thing that I do want to emphasize is like ADHD, BPD, OCD, all these things are called disorders because the definition is that they restrict you in functioning properly. But whatever means properly is very subjective. It's part of like what we as a society decide, this is now what's proper. Like, in a different situation, I might be a totally normal kind of person. I might not have any disorders because I'm not asked to work 40 hours a week, right? If I only had to work 20 hours a week, maybe I wouldn't be restricted at all, because I can do whatever I want. I'm chill, I can regulate my emotions because I have enough time for my private life. So it might actually not be on you. Like, you might only have a disorder because we're living in a world where probably everyone suffers from anxiety to some degree, because it's like a very stressful world to live in, at least the Western world that we do. So, like, again, this is why I'm trying not to label too much of it. It's good to know, to connect with people who have similar traits and similar things that they're going through, and how do they deal with it, and maybe laugh about it, like have some like memes, but don't, as you say, like, don't make it your identity. Don't focus too much on like, oh, I'm not functioning well because I have this thing, like that, because that puts a block in your own brain that is really hard to get over.
Definitely agree. And it's like, you didn't make the rules. Since when, that someone says this is proper, that this is orderly, or that this is disorderly. It's like, well, for this set of rules, yes, but give me another set of rules, and, you're in the top 1%, that everything's flowing exactly how it needs to. And so, I very much hear you on that. So like I said, I guess, in terms of, conclusions, as usual, I would say, finding the self-acceptance, self-discovery path. The medication conversation in your case is just kind of a done deal from the beginning of like, we're gonna treat this in a different way, and that's what worked. Regarding, not wanting this to be used as an excuse or a justification for everything, to avoid special treatment, but more so, I guess what I'm getting from you, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the conversation starts with you, and that you get to decide how it's going to be framed. What else would you like, in terms of, Lian's way of looking at this? Is there anything that I haven't covered that you would want to stress or emphasize before we wrap it up?
No, I think you've gotten everything down. Again, I just feel like don't feel too hung up on like the medical label of it being like, this is a medical condition, thus this is who I am. Like, who you are and like how this influences you is to a big degree how you think about it. Obviously, it's still a medical condition. So, as you say, it's different for everyone. But I do believe that there is a bit of a danger of making it too popular. I was like, it's almost like, oh, this is the cool kids club now. I'm in the ADHD club, which makes me cool. I understand it. It's a community. It's a very, very nice community, very safe. But just make sure, again, it's not everything that you are.
Fair enough. Very good. Lian, for people that want to find where you are, what you're doing, what's the best way to do so?
You can find me on the internet almost everywhere at Lian Makes Things. If you can't, find me on LinkedIn. I'm Lian Lee there. Pretty sure that's the easiest way to find me.
In general, very easy to find. You're very active. You're doing stand-up. You're trying out for musicals. You are doing all sorts of creative stuff, which is really cool to see. Looking forward to the next steps and hope we get to see each other in Paris.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, very, very good. Do some kubaroki. Looking forward to that. Thank you very much for your time today, and looking forward to see you soon in person.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Take care.
Yay.
Cheers.
See you then. Bye.